What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stokastic channel. And today we're talking about some XFL DFS. Ahead of the week of April Fool's Day, we actually have games starting March 31st, going through April 1st and April 2nd. So a good old 3-day slate for us. 4 games as usual. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all content goes live. We are also brought to you by Prize Picks. They have a first match deposit bonus up to $100. And you also get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum when you sign up and make your first deposit over with Prize Picks. To take advantage of this, click the link in the video description below. A lot of cool things going on over at Prize Picks. They're daily prop-based contests, no sharks, optimizers, or mass entries. You're making lineups of up to 5 players where you can 10 extra entry fee. And you can also use these lineups to mix and match sports. You can mix XFL with NBA. MLB is back today. And there's no props up currently for XFL. Those will be up a little later in the week. But we have tools over at Stokastic to help you take advantage of some other sports that maybe you don't know quite as much about. Looking at our Pick'em tool over on Stokastic, we've got Drew Holiday currently with a under 7 assist prop. Our projection currently has him at 6. For the NHL streets, Johnny Gaudreau shots on goal, that's at 2.5. We actually have a good over there. We project him at 3. Both of those have 60% win percent chances, which give you a pretty solid chance to take advantage of these. So that's just a little taste what we have to offer on the free side. But make sure you check out Prize Picks. Click the link in the video description below and take advantage of that $100 first match deposit bonus. All right. We move forward with XFL. We're 6 weeks in, had a little 2-week hiatus for me personally, just played some showdowns and a little bit on the main sites due to the NCAA tournament. Really had me quite busy last couple of weeks, but we are back. We've had some feedback on the shows, but we'll continue with our DraftKings sort of background and then talk about the game by game approach, and then going team by team within that. So we'll kick things off with the first game of the week here. This is actually, let me adjust the screen here. Seattle taking on Arlington. In this contest, we have a spread of 5 points in favor of Seattle. The total is 38, which is the lowest on the board. Not by much. It's a half point lower than the next game we'll talk about. Starting at the quarterback position for Seattle, we've got Ben DiNucci. I think he still firmly should be among the top signal callers on this particular slate. Seattle's passing 65% of the time, 64.5. That's first. They also average 59.5 plays per game. That's second in the league. The team is good. They're 4-2 overall. They just beat Orlando last week. Ben DiNucci doesn't do a ton with his legs, but he has more rushing upside than a player like A.J. McCarron. And with this heavy pass rate and the plays per game being second highest in the league, he comes with a good floor. That's kind of what we've been talking about him for a while. But we've sort of seen a floor with him recently. I think behind this team total, which is the 3rd highest on the slate, you can still target DiNucci pretty clearly. He is expensive, but right away, the stacks of this team make a lot of sense. So DiNucci still, I think, right in the cash consideration. I'm really looking at 2 quarterbacks, and he's the first one I'll mention for cash games. Still a solid play at the expensive price. Next up, we've got the running back position for Seattle. Morgan Ellison returned to limited practice on Tuesday and Wednesday, so that is looking pretty good for his status, which is good overall because Darius Bradwell was terrible in his place last week. Ellison, when healthy, we've seen him handle monstrous workload, so hoping he can get back, and I'm hoping that this isn't a timeshare between the two of them. Bradwell's going to be involved to some degree, but man, I have almost no interest in him as a runner after how just horrific he played in their most recent contest. Ellison, I think, would be fine. He's not an elite play at the running back position, but certainly we want to take pieces of this team as a 5-point favorite over Arlington. And Hammonds and Tamalpeo aren't actually running backs, so they're listed on DraftKings as running backs. They don't play that position. Tamalpeo is a tight end, and Hammonds is like a receiver RB hybrid. Going to the receiver position, this is an interesting spot where Josh Gordon continues to lead this team overall, but his role is declining. So efficiency has actually been pretty good for Gordon, but Jacquard Pearson, he's been far more involved, and he comes with a more expensive price tag. So right away, you should be noticing the DiNucci Pearson stack is exceedingly expensive. You're going to have to find ways to get different around that. But I think he's still fine. If I'm looking at a wide receiver too, for me, it's Blake Jackson on this team. You save a lot of salary. I'd rather play Jackson than play Josh Gordon straight up right now. It's close, but I will say you've got a slightly better projection on the back end for us with Blake Jackson. I think he makes more sense running more routes overall than Josh Gordon. And that's also the case with Juwan Green, who comes in pretty cheap here. Juwan Green and VZ both should be considered here. And the route rates for these guys, not quite as consistent. But first of all, this team runs 4 wide almost every single play. So that should be noted right away. Josh Gordon's route rate dropped to 55% last week. That came with Juwan Green at 80% and VZ at 75%. So as far as your cheaper dart throws, guys to look at that are going to save you salary, like if you're running a DiNucci double stack and you're really trying to get in Pearson, I think just double stacking with Juwan Green or VZ makes a lot of sense here. And some people ask for more showdown content in previous videos. These are 2 guys I want to play. And I think that could be at the expense of Gordon at some point. Again, just rising routes for VZ and Green. You have descending routes for Josh Gordon. At some point, this probably comes to a head, and I'm looking more at the cheap guys here, especially for stacks. Going to the Arlington side, we'll start at quarterback, where they traded for Luis Perez. This team is a disaster. So first off, cut Kyle Sloter. Good riddance. I don't know why people ever wanted him to play in the first place, but he is gone. They've already started Drew Plitt. Didn't get any different results there. The coaching staff came right out and said Luis Perez is not going to be ready for this game. So it looks like Drew Plitt is going to start with Kevin Anderson backing him up. I do not have any faith that Plitt plays all the snaps here. Think you could see some Anderson. Think you could see some Perez. Like many teams in this league, we just don't know what the quarterback playing time is going to look like. So I'm fully off Arlington right now until Luis Perez gets some more reps under his belt. And even then, you guys have watched these videos for a while. Those of you that have, my views on Luis Perez, pocket statue Perez himself. The running back position, De'Veon Smith had been a bell cow back for much of the season. But last week, he split time almost 50-50 with Letty Brown. And they also had Brian Herrien inactive. Brian Herrien comes in at the Stoneman. Letty Brown is the Stoneman. I don't know what this backfield's going to look like moving forward. And I'm not sure why he has a dash in fantasy points per game. On the back end, looking at my model, according to this, Letty Brown handled 46% of the running back touches. De'Veon Smith handled 54%. So I'm not sure what that means. Letty Brown, 11 carries. De'Veon Smith, 10. De'Veon Smith has been terrible in a bell cow role this year. So it just looks like they're trying out other backs, trying to see what they have on the roster alongside of him. You're going to notice with Arlington here, that's kind of a theme with this team. They've been so bad this year that they've just been sort of mixing and matching their roster and giving guys like extended opportunities. Letty Brown and De'Veon Smith even had the same route rate, 42% last week. So this is a 50-50 timeshare. And if Herrien is active, again, he was inactive last week, I think this could go full-blown committee. So I'm off De'Veon Smith. I think you could take some shots on Letty Brown and Brian Herrien. Killins is not on the team anymore. I believe it's injured reserve. Among the receivers, this is a disaster. Sal Cannella is the only person with a locked-in route rate here. He's their tight end. I think you could play him with some confidence. But outside of that, I don't have any confidence whatsoever with this team. You did see Rennell Hall go to injured reserve, but the route rate for this team was unbelievable last week. Brandon Arconato, 39%. Tyler Vaughn's just under 50%. Lawan Winningham, 39%. Caleb Van Der Esch, 52%. Javante Payton, 39%. Even Rennell Hall was at 52%. He's gone now. So, I mean, they signed Victor Bolden. I'd imagine he jumps up from a 21% route rate. But outside of Cannella, you didn't have anybody even touch 60% of the routes last week in a competitive game for Arlington. I mean, that was a game, you look at their team, they lost 15-9 to the Brahmas. They were right in that game. They're 3-3 overall. This is just a team that, frankly, doesn't deserve to be 500 at this point. Behind the bad quarterback play, the revolving door at wide receiver, and their insistence on slamming De'Veon Smith into the back of the offensive line upwards of 20 times per game is just inexcusable at this point. So I don't plan on taking many stabs at this Arlington team. If I do, it's probably just a rogue Canella or maybe a really cheap running back here. I'll bring you back to that page quickly. Probably just a really cheap Letty Brown or Brian Harry, and this team's a 5-point underdog. Don't see a lot of upside here until we get Perez and hopefully some consistency at receiver. Second game, we've got San Antonio taking on Vegas. This game has a 3-point spread in favor of Vegas, 38.5 total. We'll start with the Brahmas, who've had crazy quarterback luck this year. Jack Cohn injured, Reed Sinnett injured. They started Juwan Pass last game. He split time 50-50 with Kurt Benkert. I think at some point you're probably going to see Kurt Benkert play all of the snaps. I don't know if that's here. The XFL really requires monitoring all the way until kickoff. We're recording this on Thursday morning. Things are going to change in this span. Maybe we get some news here. Until further notice, though, I'm not going to be playing either Benkert or Pass. I just need one of them to play all the snaps, and we haven't seen it. This is a bad team. They're underdogs to a bad team. Man, the quarterback position here is very difficult to evaluate. So until further notice, I think this is one we probably just stay away from. Being underdogs to the Vipers is not a good sign. At the running back position, I believe Calvin Turner can come back this week. He also plays receiver, so this is tricky. Anyway, this is maybe a little more interesting to me on the San Antonio side. They use Jock Patrick in a bell cow workload. So Kalen Ballage is hurt. He's not going to play the rest of the year. And the other running backs on the roster, like John Hilleman and I guess Kevin Marks is the guy they signed. They're not expected to play much at all. So last week, Jock Patrick, 82% of the total touches. He had 15 carries. This is a guy that's had a cup of coffee in the NFL. He's a player I don't have really any hesitancy with. I think he's somebody that could be a pretty decent player. The only concern is how much efficiency do we see? But I mean, his route rate jumped to 67%. Jock Patrick, I think, is the best play individually on this entire team. So I'll isolate him first and foremost. Again, you're going to have to watch the status of these other guys. Hilleman and Marks, I'm not too worried about, to be honest with you. Turner should be playing more receiver. Among the receivers, this is maybe the most difficult position to evaluate on the entire team. So this team, basically, they had Calvin Turner and Landon Akers on injured reserve. They activated them both last week. Only Akers played. Travis Tavinen didn't play last week. Jalen Tolliver and Travis Johnson only ran 4 and 3 routes. I guess moving forward, we're expecting Fred Brown and TJ Vasher to be the leaders of this team. Landon Akers did jump back to an 83% route rate coming off the injury. That's good. He saw 5 targets. But overall, I think this is probably going to be Vasher 1, Akers 2, Fred Brown 3 for the foreseeable future, getting sprinkles of Tolliver and Tavinen and Johnson. Some of those players have been injured, and we'll have to wait and see on their status. I'm not sure, but basically this has been a revolving door all season long at receiver. We've seen a number of players jump up for like 80% of the routes, then go back to single digits. That could happen with any of these guys. It's just last week we saw the 3 wide receivers set as Fred Brown, TJ Vasher, and Landon Akers. Again, I think the 2 most consistent of these players are Vasher and Akers, if I had to play one. Alize Mack's actually more involved at the tight end position for this team than most tight ends, so he's a dart thrower you could use. But again, I think I'm just going to go up to Akers and Vasher, especially with Vasher at 3,400. Like there's no excuse for him being that cheap. He's just a very easy person to play in this particular game. Going to the Vegas side, apparently they don't understand the value of quarterbacks. They traded Luis Perez for a linebacker. Regardless, a lot of people assumed Brett Hundley would come in and start as the highest paid player in the league, but they decided to announce Jalen McClendon as the starter. I do not think he plays all his snaps. Now, he very well could, so some GPP darts make sense with McClendon. He has decent mobility from his college days. I have no faith in him as a passer, but this Vegas team is favored. Overall, the team passes the ball about 57% of the time. They run 56 plays per game. They're 5th in both pass rate and plays per game. This team is bad. They're 1-5 overall, so they're easily among the worst teams in this quarterback situation, I don't think gives us any hope in them. But all this to say, I don't hate a GPP dart at McClendon and the off chance he gets all the snaps. At running back, it's basically been full three-way committee for this team. As you can see, they put Torrey on injured reserve. So that at least narrows it somewhat. But I think this is a team that's still pretty much a disaster overall from a rushing perspective. Last week, Lovett handled 60% of the touches to Rod Smith's 40. Now, the route rates were almost identical between these two. I do not think there's much differentiation on a week-to-week basis. Honestly, the route rates still aren't even, full route rates. We saw 31% for Lovett, 24% for Smith. So this team uses a lot of, 12 personnel sort of groupings. They use their running backs to block. Tough to get to one of these running backs, especially at the elevated price. If I am, it's Lovett, and then I'll just move on. At receiver, we've seen Jeff Badette put together some pretty solid games. His route rate is among the best in the league. Target share is solid, so I have no issues with Jeff Badette. Honestly, Geronimo Allison and Martavis Bryant, they're both solid plays here too. Allison, he's been at about 90% of the routes the last 2 weeks. After the injury to Bryant, he jumped back up to 73%, so I think you could use him. They're all pretty expensive. You're not getting a discount on any of them, so I'd tread carefully here. If I play one, it's probably going to be Allison, just the cheapest of the group, most consistent route rate. Brian hasn't really given us anything this year, which is sad because of his former NFL pedigree. You also will see Matthew Sexton and Sink Sweeting on the field for a bit. Sweeting 42% route rate last week. Sexton just a rotational guy here and there. And part of the problem is this team uses 4 tight ends, except they all are somewhere between 10 and 35% of their routes on any given slate. So you can't really consistently use a tight end either. You're basically paying all the way up for a receiver. And in stacks of Vegas, it's basically this unproven quarterback situation, or you're running a one-off here. Overall, this is the trickiest game, I think, on the entire slate to target. The latter 2 games here are the better 2 games. We've got DC taking on Orlando. In this game, DC is a 10-point favorite. The total is 45.5, highest on the slate. DC has the highest implied team total on the slate, and they have Jordan Ta'amu, who might be the best price-adjusted QB. I think you could use him as a cash QB. He will split time with De'Aaron King, but the rushing upside is big for him. Going to the game logs, they actually use him a lot as a passer in the last game. 245 yards, 2 scores. Finished with -5 rush attempts, but if you look at the 3 previous weeks, he's very involved on the ground. That was just a hyper-competitive game, which probably won't be the case here. So Ta'amu does have a lot of rushing equity that I think we could capitalize on. And he's improved as a passer. He had like a catastrophic week 1, slightly better week 2, and he's shown significant improvement from there. And most importantly, the snaps have gone down for De'Aaron King. So I think this is something we could look at in the near future. For reference, last week you saw Ta'amu with 71 snaps, King was 6. And that's been a trend for this team. It's moving more towards Ta'amu. I think if you could guarantee me all the snaps or something similar to what we saw last week, he would be your number 1 cash QB. Right now, I think it's a debate between him and DiNucci. At the running back position, I don't know why Armstead keeps having this questionable tag. I guess they keep limiting him in practice, but he's been playing through the injury now for a week, so I guess it makes sense. Anyway, I think Armstead is fine and going to play here. And when he does, it takes a little bit of the shine off Abram Smith. Last week, we saw 70% of the running back touches go to Abram, 30% go to Reichwell. But this team is so run heavy that Abram Smith still had 19 carries and Reichwell Armstead had 8 himself. All that to say, I think they're both fine price-adjusted plays. If Armstead misses this game for whatever reason, he's going to be, Abram Smith that is going to be a monstrous play at 9,600, one of the best plays in the slate. And then Armstead is still a good GPP dart throw. He's going to handle about 30% of the running back touches. You got a ton of touchdown equity here. If the game blows out to any degree, Armstead makes sense. Raymond Calais is like a TJ Hammond type back. They've listed him at receiver too, so I don't think he's in play really here as the running back position. I think he's kind of that hybrid that a lot of these teams have, like a Calvin Turner as well. At receiver for this team, because the offense has been so productive, we've actually seen some pretty good games from these Washington receivers, which I need to honestly play more of. I haven't been playing enough. The top three for this team, well, really there's a top two, and then we'll talk about Josh Hammond, but Lucky Jackson and Chris Blair are your top two in terms of route rate on the year. Chris Blair, 88%, Lucky Jackson, 85%. Jackson has a sharp lead in targets, 34-21. So I think right away, your number one receiver is Lucky Jackson, which he's not even the most expensive, which tells you a lot. Chris Blair, 4,700, very affordable here too. Josh Hammond had been running every single route, but he saw his routes drop from 90% to 60 last week. Not exactly sure why. That came with, like Jazz Ferguson, Jaquez Ezzard running a few routes. But I think the main thing was they used a lot of two tight end. You had 43% route rates for both Ethan Wolf and Briley Moore McKinney, which we hadn't seen previously. And even Alex Ellis jumped in for a 23% route rate. So basically what this suggests is that Washington's running 12 personnel at the highest rate in the league, and Josh Hammond has been the victim rather than Lucky Jackson or Chris Blair. So I think that more than anything suggests we should be paying down for Blair and Lucky Jackson more than anything else. Going to the Orlando side, I think this team is underrated. They have not won a game, but they've now played a bunch of really close games. And I don't think they're going to win this one, but at some point, this team is going to win a game. I'm probably going to continue betting them. They're 0-6, but they only lost to the Vipers by 3, the Renegades by 1. They just lost to Seattle 26-19. They've moved to Quinton Dormady as their QB. Doesn't offer a lot of rushing, but Dormady's been good as a passer. And I think more than anything, it just keeps games competitive when he's on the field. 8K, if he plays every single snap, I think you could use him. It's the toughest matchup in the league, but Dormady's played well. No longer am I off the Orlando Guardians bandwagon. I think we could actually play them now that they've shown a willingness to play one QB all the snaps. Running back Devin Darrington has come off injured reserve to join Jermaine Martin. This has not really resulted in any efficiency, but over the last 2 weeks, Jermaine Martin's still about 60% of the touches to Darrington's 40. It's tough to target either of these guys as huge underdogs. I think for me, it's still probably Jermaine Martin, although pricing pretty efficient here. Don't really want to target either. Think they should be close with Martin having the edge. At receiver, Lance Lenoir went down with an injury, so now we have a projected 3 wide receiver set of Cody Latimer, Charleston Rambo, Eli Rogers, and then I don't know who the final receiver is going to be for this team off the top of my head. They have done a couple things with the roster. It's this kind of the joke of the XFL, the revolving door that has been Orlando's roster. They signed KD Cannon, so maybe KD Cannon plays a role here. They still have got players like Dan Williams, Andrew Jamiel, Dedrick Thomas, who could play a decent amount of snaps here. But I think the top 3 are pretty clearly going to be Latimer, Charleston Rambo, and Eli Rogers. KD Cannon would be maybe a dart to potentially throw. He's been injured to start this year. I believe he was on DC earlier in the year before that injury. But ultimately here, you've got the clear top 2. Makes sense in pricing. They're both 8K. Fine with either in stacks. But the real value, in my opinion, is Eli Rogers with that elite route rate, former NFL pedigree. At some point, he's going to be a buy low here. And with the quarterback consistency, I think this is now finally the time to start buying some Eli Rogers, especially if you're playing DC players and you're looking for a run back. He just makes sense as a very affordable option. Final game, we have St. Louis taking on Houston. Probably the best game on the board just in terms of excitement. Tight 3-point spread in favor of Houston, 44.5 total, second highest on the board. That should give us a lot of interest. On the St. Louis side, we have solid but unspectacular quarterback A.J. McCarron, really good in terms of passing, just awful rushing ability here. He's a pocket statue, but this team does pass the ball 60% of the time. That's 4th in the league, and they run 54 plays per game. That's 6th. The team is 4-2 overall after demolishing the Vipers last week. Again, McCarron offers quite a bit of upside just as a passer. He should be in your player pool as one of the few guys who has a locked-in role. You're not going to see him benched at any point, which honestly goes a long way in this league. So don't hate McCarron. Would rather play DiNucci, would rather play Tiamu. But in tournaments, we got to get different somehow and not get crazy by playing guys like Jalen McClendon. At running back, three-way committee for the most part, but they've somewhat condensed opportunity here. So with St. Louis, I think you could throw some shots on Brian Hill. Over the last 4 weeks, he's handled 79, 70, 80, and 74% of the running back touches. It looks a little gross on paper because Mateo Durant and Kareem Walker will both play a little bit, but I really want to emphasize little bit here. It's basically a bell cow role for Brian Hill with just those couple touches that go to the other players. Even his route rate's been awesome, above 60%. In 3 of the last 4 weeks, the only dissenting week, he was at 59%. So really good role here for Brian Hill. He should be in your player pool. No surprise to anyone. Going to the receivers, Hakeem Butler has been awesome for this team, and I think we can continue targeting him really with no worries. 94% route rate, 100% route rate last 2 weeks. I think he's firmly the number one here. With Darius Shepard as the 2, 100% route rate, 94% route rate last 2. And then Austin Perel as the 3, 86% and 82% route rate. This is with Marcel Aitman injured. He's not coming back anytime soon. The rest of the receivers just rotate. You have Steven Mitchell, 29% of the routes. Gary Jennings, 15%. George Campbell, 24%. Nothing really to write home about, and nothing really we can use in DFS outside of the top 3, which honestly, the clarity here means a lot. No problem with going Butler, Shepard, or Perel. I think they're all fine price-adjusted plays at their various price points. Tight end is a rotation here as well, so nothing really to see. Final team, we've got Houston. This is a tricky one. So Houston, the favorite here. I actually am not sure I agree with this. On paper, again, Houston 3-point favorite over St. Louis. I don't know how much Brandon Silvers plays. He got benched last week for Cole McDonald, who came in and looked awesome. Cole McDonald has far better rushing equity than Brandon Silvers. Brandon Silvers basically just been average as a passer and then slightly below average recently. Whoever ends up playing most of the snaps for this Houston team deserves significant consideration because they're second in pass rate, fourth in plays per game. They're 4-2. They've now lost 2 straight games, but that kind of explains the benching. I don't know what to do here. I hope we get news later in the week that McDonald's starting. Then I would have a lot of interest there. But until we get that word, I think it's probably just a stay away. I don't know. This is GPP situation. Perhaps the most difficult playing time projection on the entire board right now because there's no changing personnel. It is literally just Silver's played so bad he got benched. I don't know what to do. Looking maybe at a GPP McDonald. Running backs, Max Borges, after the injury he suffered earlier this year, has come back into full bell cow duties. Max Borges certainly deserves to be on our rosters. 80% of the touches last week. That resulted in 11 carries. And again, he has an awesome pass game ability here. He's now seen 7 targets in back-to-back weeks. Route rate still isn't quite where we want it, just above 30% each of the last 2 games, but we know what's in there. He's the former Washington State back. Just hoping we get a little more pass-catching equity from Borgie, and I think it comes at some point. Nick Holley was cut, which is good for this team. Getting to that, the receivers for this Houston team over the last couple of weeks have been pretty consistently Deontay Burnett, Cedric Byrd, Travell Harris, and Justin Smith. They run 4 wide most of the time. So here are the route rates. Last week specifically, Burnett, 97%, Byrd, 85%, Travell, 79%, Justin Smith, 100%. Now, we also have seen Ben Putman at 32%. Jontre Kirkland before the injury, he's now gone, which has opened up some routes for players. But even Nick Holley, he has a 55% route rate on the year. He's been cut. Now, they signed Michael Bandy, who comes over, most recently played with the Chargers. He's actually played some time in the regular season. He's not in the player pool, so we can't actually play him right now. It remains to be seen whether he'll be added. But I think until he gets more snaps under his belt, he's probably just a rotational guy if he's even active. So this team has changed receiver personnel a lot. And last week, Jacare Roberson came on. He's a former Wake Forest product, big body receiver. He wasn't even active for the game, and I think that just meant there wasn't enough time to climatize to the offense. That could be what we see with Bandy this week. Tavon Salter came in and played just a few routes. All this to say, I don't think we see a huge shakeup in the top 4 this week with Burnett 1, Harris 2, Byrd 3, Justin Smith 4. They're all very close. I don't have strong preferences between them. Target shares are actually really close. So the pricing, honestly, if one guy draws a lot of ownership, I'll just pivot. But regardless, because the other additions to the offense have happened so recently, I'm not sure they really shake up the top four. Again, this is a situation where you need to watch the news, see who's active, see who's inactive, listen to the beats, go on Twitter, search these players' names, try to find a depth chart, like see if there's any shakeup here. If Jacare Roberson's listed as a starter, you probably want to take shots. If they add Bandy to the player pool and he's listed as a starter, you probably want to take a shot. But until further notice, that's how I would rank them, with Burnett, Harris, Bird, and Smith as your top four guys you want to look at for this Houston team. All right, before we dive out, we've been giving the top plays at each position. Right now is how I want to caveat this. This is going to change, but at the quarterback position, I think you're looking at Tiamu, DiNucci, and McCarron right now. You could make an argument that Dormady should be on this list too. Just the somewhat lack of clarity in playing time keeps him off. I'm going to keep Tiamu, DiNucci, and McCarron as my top three quarterbacks in no particular order. Again, I think there's a gap between Tiamu, DiNucci, and then McCarron would be three. Not decided on Tiamu, DiNucci. At running back, I'm going to list Abram Smith 1, Brian Hill 2, and Jock Patrick 3. Borgie close 4. I think you could maybe interchange Borgie and Patrick, but Patrick brings that cheap price tag, so I wanted to get at least one cheapie in the top 3 guys. Then at receiver, we'll include tight ends in this group too. Hakeem Butler for St. Louis, you just have that solid offense, passing the ball a lot, pretty fast. Ja'Cory Pearson, you're paying for him, of course, but same thing there. I think you want pieces of really St. Louis, Seattle, and Houston's wide receiving core. My number one for Houston, I'm going to go out on a limb and put Cedric Bird there. Been running almost every single route, good projection. And again, I want to include some cheaper guys in these top 3. I don't just want to go stone chalk across the board. So we're going to go Butler, Pearson, and Bird for top 3 receivers. That'll do it for us today. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the video, any feedback you might have. Reach out on Twitter if you'd like. I'm at Matt_Gajewski, always willing to chop it up. And we'll be back again next week talking some more XFL DFS. Until then, I'll see you guys later and good luck.